Welcome. This video is making a leather knife sheath for a 4-inch premier paring knife by the knife manufacturer Sheath. This video is not sponsored or promoted by Sheath, although that would be great. This video will be about the process that I use in making the knife sheath. Handy little knife. I've enjoyed using it, and I'll be using a variety of different materials. As you can see, I'm using a piece of paper and a knife and a pen. A piece of paper, the knife, and a pen to make the template for the knife sheath. As you can see here, I'm folding it over and I'm going to trace the outline of the knife onto the paper, and that's the beginning of the template. The next step is to create a margin, which will be for the stitching, as well as for a piece of leather that protects the stitching from the sharpness of the knife itself. As I work on the template here in the video, I'll talk briefly about the list of tools and materials. The leather that I'm using for this project is a 4mm leather, brown, very nice. I've made sheaths for knives out of this leather before, and the two knives you see laying on the table that are sheathed are made from the same leather. And I'll be using artificial sinew for the stitching. I also have on the top left a couple of containers that hold stitch rivets. They hold rivets, and then also there's a snap fastener set so that I can make the closure of the knife sheath with the rivets and the snap. And it'll be demonstrated as I go how those are applied. For other tools that I have set out, the utility knife that I'm using now to do the cutting, and I will also use a skiving knife, which is on the middle of the table, and it's got a little white blade protector on it. The skiving knife is useful to thin the thicknesses of the leather where the leather is going to be stitched together, and there will also be a piece of leather on the stitching that protects the stitches from the sharpness of the knife blade, and the skiving will help to thin that material so that it's useful and effective, but that it is not thick and bulky. In the process, I'll also be using contact adhesive. As I'm working with the stitching, the contact adhesive helps to hold things in place as there's being punching done. I'll use a leather punch. I'll also use a hammer for the punching, and the cutting board that I'm using is a inexpensive cutting board that has been useful for a lot of things and works really well for the leather cutting and crafting. Another tool that will be used in the process is a leather groove cutting tool, and that will be used where the leather folds on what would be the crease where the back of the knife blade is at. And the purpose for that is to help the fold to fold over a little bit cleaner with less bulkiness. And as you can see, I'm getting the template traced onto the leather now. Got all the pieces and beginning the cutout. And as cutting these pieces out, using a utility knife for the cutting, and there we are. Got those pieces, and cutting the piece that will become the filler piece at the point of the stitching. And you can see as I'm cutting this out that it's going to be a very thin strip of leather that simply is the shape of the knife, and it goes on the outside of the sheath. And there's a trial fit. Everything fits, and we're on to the next step. And this is exciting because this is the part where I was describing the leather groove tool. This tool will help the fold of the leather to be less bulky. As you can see, as it shaves the leather out of the groove, and yet I'm being very cautious, or I'd say being very slow about cutting the groove and just making light passes, mostly so that I don't go too deep and have to remake the whole piece. So taking some time there, having got the groove made, now I'm skiving the thickness of the leather down for the insert. And this tool has been really useful. It's an extremely sharp knife and cuts very well. And as you can see there, reducing the thickness of the leather, which will help out great for the final shape of the knife sheath. Thinning the leather on the sheath itself. And as that is thinning down, that's the area where the stitching is going to be. So I'm not going to thin too much, just enough that it allows for a comfortable fold and room for the knife blade. And here we are doing a little more test fitting, finding the location for the rivets. And the knife leather, the holder part of the knife sheath, could be stitched on as easily as it's being riveted on. The rivets have a nice look, and as I have a rivet set, that made sense, and I'm going to go ahead and do the rivets as well as the snap clasp. There it is, pounding the rivets into place and getting everything lined up, and another test fit. As the knife sheath is being made, I find it very useful to do test fits frequently enough, often enough, that things are lining up and things are working out along the way, rather than simply completing the project and then trying it out. And there will be a example coming up here briefly where you get to see where some of that test fitting comes into action. As I made the template for the knife sheath, I made the template with the fold of the paper, with the knife right up against the fold of the paper. And as I'm sure you can guess, because of the thickness of the leather, the fold is different. And so here I'm working on the skiving, getting the fold to fold over the leather insert. Take a minute to work that out. And then as I fold it and find out that the thickness of the leather folds different, I'm going to end up changing a little bit of the process of how to stitch the knife together, and I'll end up moving that little strip of leather that becomes the insert. And you'll see that here in a second. So far, everything lining up good. Testing it with the knife, seeing that it doesn't quite fit. So I'm going to move it out about 1/8 of an inch. And now it fits just right. But as you see, it doesn't quite line up perfectly with the two edges of the leather. But now that it lines up with the knife in there, now I'll begin doing the punching. Here we've got some punches. Nice little punch tool. It includes a little strip of metal with a groove in it so that it's a little bit easier to remove the punch tool. Because going through 3 layers of leather, it can be a bit of work to work that leather punch back out and that slotted metal flat piece helps a lot. Getting the punches done for all the stitching, and as those are all completed and finished, there we are. Now we'll start with the sewing, the stitching, using a artificial sinew stitching material. Very strong, very durable, and has a color that goes well with the brown leather. Getting the needle thread on, and in this process, simply running the stitches. I'm doing a double stitch on this, and I'll leave the end of the thread right where it is. Do all the stitching, and then as it stitches back, tie off the final knot. So we'll take a minute here and watch as the stitching is being done. And speeding things up in double time helps for camera time, and the total video time works out a little bit better. So here we are in some high-speed motion, doing some stitching. The artificial sinew works very well with the holes that are punched with the leather punch. And it's very satisfying at the stage of the stitching. Having spent the time creating the template, spending the time getting the leather pieces cut out, getting everything to fit together as it should, and then after doing all the punching, to finally start getting the stitches holding things together in their final form. It's very exciting and very rewarding to see a creation of leather come together, and the stitching just really helps to hold it together and makes it feel like the outcome of the project is in the near future, and it is. So hang on, a few more stitches here, and I'll be hitting the end of the sheath. The punch that is used, the punch that I used for this project, is a 4mm spacing punch, and the set of punches has both a 5-punch, a 3-punch, a 2-punch, and a single punch. A very useful set, and it's been working very well. And going through here, got the stitches to the center, and at that point the battery on the camera head expired. So the video stopped, and I had not realized it until I had started sewing back towards the beginning again. So here I am making the final double stitch coming back through the middle section here. So a section of it had been stitched when the camera was off, but as we see coming up here, going back towards the starting point, and then I'll be tying the knot off, and that'll be on the camera. And coming up there, very good. And one of the things that has been valuable, or that has been useful for me, is to be aware of how common it is for people to tie a square knot, sometimes improperly. And while it's called a granny knot, it basically doesn't hold as well. So making sure that I have the proper knot has been important. And using a lighter to singe. And don't use your fingers to press down the melted sinew. Be sure to use some metal of the lighter. And here I'm using a rough grit of 80 grit sandpaper and sanding down where the edges of the leather had not lined up exactly, and helping to finish off some of the other areas, getting the leather into the shape that I want the final shape to be. And as the sanding is going to be lining up the edges of the leather, it also helps to clean up any of the edges from where the knife cutting may have left an uneven texture on that edge of the leather. So here, getting the front edge sanded, I'm going to leave the knife clasp the loop of leather that wraps around the knife with the rivet on it. I'm going to leave that edge as it was cut with the knife. A skill that could be implemented in future leatherworking projects is to do more of a burnished edge on the edges of the leather, even before things are riveted together or snapped together. But for this project, I'll simply be sanding on the edge, and it's getting a little bit closer. Do a little bit more sanding here. And then I'll be switching to a 220 grit sandpaper very soon. But as you can see, shaping up nicely, getting the little bits of leather everywhere, and there we go. Okay, moving to the 220 grit. A little bit finer paper, a little bit more of the finished look, and getting that shaping and finishing. There's a tool available that cuts a edge on the outside edge of the leather, and that could be utilized. I did not use it in this creation, so in this video you won't see that tool being used, but that's available. And after the sanding, I'm going to use the block of wood and do a bit of a wood burnish, and the more advanced level, or what I could do in future projects, instead of just using the wood to burnish, I could use the wood to burnish and then use a leather dye on the edges of the leather, and that would help to create a more distinctive finished looking edge. Some people may even use waxes on the edge with the burnishing. But with that, that is the completed knife sheath. And it's been enjoyable to make, and it feels very rewarding to be able to make the template, cut out the leathers, do the punching, do the rivets and the snaps, do the stitching, and do the burnishing, all the way to the point of the completed knife sheath. And the snaps are working well, and as I'm right-handed, it was specifically made so that it would be convenient. And it fits right in with the family of knife sheaths that I have. This is a Sheath Master Utility 6.5 inch that I have right there, and a Sheath Utility 6 inch, a very nice knife, and the knife sheath that I just made, the 4 inch Premier Paring knife, also made by Sheath. They've been great kitchen knives. Thanks for watching this as I've created a knife sheath, and hope to see you in the next video. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you can follow along for more videos.